there about 10 years, both Malon and Chilion also died. Hear me. So that the women were left without her 2 sons and her husband. Did I read that right?
The woman was left, yeah.
Without her 2 sons and her husband, yes. Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
6 through 14.
Yeah. When she heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, Naomi and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show kindness to you as you have shown to your dead, and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them, and they wept aloud and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons? Who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has gone out against me." Oh, at this they wept again. Then Orpah said, "Kiss her mother-in-law." Oprah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. Sorry, these classes just.
Yeah, it's okay. All right, so who'd like to read 15 through 22? Okay, thanks.
Look, said Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her God to go back with her. But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from where you go, I won't. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me ever so severely, painting the death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined with her, she stopped urging. So the 2 women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole house was stirred because of them. The woman exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" "Don't call me Naomi," she told them. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very good, right? One of my folk with the Lord is talking about my kingdom. Why call me Naomi then? Lord has afflicted me, and the Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." So Naomi turned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth and the Moabites to her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest began.
Okay. All right, so in this first chapter, there are a lot of names, and they're the names of everybody and a couple of the places are extremely important to know. So, first of all, Elimelech, Malon, however you say it, Chilion, and Naomi are all from Bethlehem originally. Bethlehem literally means city of bread, which is kind of ironic because there's a famine happening at the beginning. So they're leaving the city of bread because there's a famine. Elimelech, his name means my God is king. Naomi means pleasant. And Malon means sickly. Chilion means wasting or frail. I tried very hard to find out if those names meant that before they were named or if those meanings came because they died young. I didn't yeah, I didn't find anything conclusive on that. However, I did find, sorry, some interesting kind of etymology that Malon comes from Maklon, probably from Kala, which means to be worn, like worn out, weak, sick, or afflicted. It can also mean, in a positive way, to flatter or entreat. So he could be a man of sickness or a man of entreaty. Kilion comes from Kilion, which comes from Kileon, means failing or destruction, which is from Kala, to end, be finished, completed, prepared, completely destroyed. So he's a man of finality or wasting away. So those are happy things named. I'm guessing that they didn't mean that when they were born. So Naomi means pleasant, but then she becomes Mara later, which means bitter. So then we move on to Orpah and Ruth, who are from Moab. And Moab has its own interesting roots. It had its beginning in incest. The people listening to the story would have been disturbed that they chose to go to Moab, because it did not have a really great reputation. Orpah means back of the neck, which is interesting since she's the one who left. We see the back of her neck. It can also mean submitted. So she kind of did submit to her mother-in-law by leaving. Ruth means friend. And there is no instance that can be found anyway of this name appearing in Hebrew until after the story of Ruth. So she brought that name to their tradition. Total aside, I found something really fun about Orpah, that the Midrash, which is an ancient rabbinic interpretation of scripture, and who knows how reliable it is, identifies Orpah as the grandmother of Goliath, who is then killed by Ruth's great-grandson, David.
Through all this again.
So we've got the main character, Elimelech, my God, is changed. We've got Mahlon, sickly, Kilion, wasting or frail, Naomi, pleasant, who turns to Mara, bitter, Orpah, back of the neck, or submitted, Ruth, friend, and Bethlehem, the city of bread. So they do return to Bethlehem. Names are really important in much of the Bible, but especially in this. So I was wondering if anybody knows the meaning of their name.
Friend.
Yeah.
Sweet as honey.
Sweet as honey. Anybody else?
Kind of wagon maker.
Wagon.
Wheel maker.
Okay. Big
The winner. The win. Victory.
Victory, the winner. Cool. Yeah, Rebecca is from the Hebrew Rivka, which means to bind or tie. So that's my fun name part. Okay.
Perfect. So we get the beginning of the story here. Just kind of doing a little review of what's happened here. So they go to Moab to get away from the famine. All of the men folk die, and we're left with Naomi and her two daughters-in-law, who then decide that Bethlehem has better options. It is no longer in a famine anymore, so they hear. So they think about making the journey back. So that just kind of summarizes a little bit, but it's a really tragic story. These three women are left in a world that is not friendly to them, not kind to them. And they have to make a way for themselves and to figure out what to do next. So it definitely starts with a very compelling story. So the reason that Naomi wants to return to Bethlehem is that they hear that the famine is no longer as bad there, so they're going to try to go back. What are her motivations for urging Orpah and Ruth to return to Moab instead of going with her?
Well, she thinks they'll have a better option to get married again if they go back to their own country, they're foreigners. And so to have a foreigner marry, in Bethlehem probably would, and she's thinking of their best interest. They're young, they still have a chance to have another family and have kids and stuff like that. So she probably loves them very much and she wants them to have the best. And she doesn't think going back to Bethlehem will be the best. They'll probably end up being spinsters because they probably won't get married. So I think she's thinking of the best for them.
Any other motivations that might be at play?
There's also the connection here that not only are they to get married, but they're to get married within the family.
Mhm.
And Naomi's saying, I'm way too old.
Mhm.
I'm not gonna have. So the expectation is that they would be married to her sons.
Right, and we're gonna get to the whole like levirate marriage law thing here in a minute. That kind of stuff. Do you think that there's some self-motivation as well, though? Like for her to arrive in Bethlehem with two other women, the three of them having to figure out what to do, is that a more complex situation than her trying to figure it out on her own in a land that would probably welcome her back, right? She's from there, she probably has family still there. Is there a piece of that?
They're from Moab. Not a
Well, I
good.
thought she was being unselfish because then she wouldn't have anybody with her to help her. Could it be that way?
Interesting that the Bethlehem and Moab are fairly close to each other,
Mhm.
different sides of the
Mhm.
Tennessee, but they were still considered to be like almost different races or something.
Mhm.
Well, and the interesting comment that it had in the study material we were using is when she talks to the women about leaving, they've already journeyed, was it 70 miles, something
Mhm.
like that. So
Mhm.
they'd already walked a good chunk of the way back
Mhm.
to Bethlehem. And then she's like, so you really should just go back.
Yeah,
So there's a little, they talked about in materials about, safety and traveling in numbers. Was there just some thought, initially about keeping them together for making the journey easier?
but also pointing out that her returning to Bethlehem with two daughters-in-law that everyone would hate would not help her either. So. Yeah.
So since Dan brought up this crazy marriage law, could somebody look up Deuteronomy 25? And that's verses 5 through 10, so that we can kind of read through what this is all coming from.
I got it. Want me to read it then?
Yeah.
Yeah, when brothers reside together and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the deceased shall not be married outside the family to a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go into her, taking her in marriage and performing the duty of a husband's brother to her. And the firstborn whom she bears shall succeed in the line of the deceased brother, so that his name may not be blotted out of Israel. But if the man has no desire to marry his brother's widow, then his brother's widow shall go up to the elders at the gate and say, my husband's brother refuses to perpetuate his brother's name in Israel. He will not perform the duty of a husband's brother to me. Then the elders of his town shall summon him and speak to him. If he persists, saying, I have no desire to marry her, then his brother's wife shall go up to him in the presence of the elders, pull his sandal off his foot, spit in his face, and declare, this is what is done to the man who does not build up his brother's house. Throughout Israel, his family shall be known as the house of him whose sandal was pulled off.
And the thing with the sandal will come in handy when we get to chapter 4. So keep that in the back of your mind. So this is kind of what they're referring to. And it does get a little confusing because we have 2 generations where this has now happened. So if Naomi found, like she describes, Naomi finds someone to marry, to give a son, so that then Ruth and Orpah would have someone to be married to. Logistically, it just time-wise doesn't make a lot of sense, which is the point that she's making. But even on the other level, if it went down a generation and then they'd have to find someone for the 2 women to marry, but then the person they married, that son would technically not be theirs. It would technically be the former husband that died, and the land that was promised to them would go to that family and not to the family who is financially then taking care of this family. So it's a very complex situation. You have a look on your face. It is very confusing.
So what's the fun, what is the purpose of this?
To keep the land and the name in a line, so like if Ruth, well, and we'll get into this, but like, so if she has a child from a relative of Mahlon, that becomes Mahlon's son, it is then his line. And so it would be in his name and the land would go through him. It would not then go to the other.
Okay,
The new husband.
so
the new
it's really,
husband.
it's a way of sort of maintaining financial security.
Mhm.
Okay.
And just that need to go down, because if you think about it, if you got married to a relative that had a different last name,
Mhm.
then, and they got all that land and whatever, then your name disappeared, kind of.
Mhm.
And so it's a way to keep that name going too.
Sort of like an honor concept almost. So,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, this is where the Henry VIII thing came out of, when his brother died and he married Catherine.
Okay.
So you stone an adulterer, but if you sleep with your brother's widow, it's.
No.
If you don't.
If you don't.
So no, so you don't need to,
Okay.
you need to sleep with your brother's widow, Wayne.
Yeah.
You need to.
Even if he's already married, yeah, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, see, that's the thing.
That he's taking on a second wife.
Right, and so that's the thing, why some people didn't want to do this, because it would take away from their own kids' inheritance, or it wouldn't add to their own children's inheritance. Then it would be, there's this weird thing with inheritance. So I'm sure there were plenty of wives who were like, yeah, no, but I don't know how much say they got in there.
So we'll get into more of that later as the story goes on, because that directs how it is. This is how it directs kind of some of Ruth and Naomi's decision making going forward. And one of the things that I had, gosh, now I don't have the quote sitting in front of me, that I had put on the announcement that we put in the weekly thing was kind of the concept of being shrewd in order to kind of make the way forward and be blessed. And so there is an element of like agency within these women that they're trying to kind of make a way for themselves, and quite enlightening that this is in such an old document as well, that's in there. So
This is making it sound like the position of women is kind of way down there. Does that sound?
Yeah, well, because they had no way, they couldn't just go back to Bethlehem and open a store and start selling things. I mean, they literally had no recourse other than prostitution or begging. That was it.
or this
They could,
marriage law.
yeah, or this levirate marriage law, yeah.
So do you want to do the next little section?
Sure. Okay, so why does Ruth choose to stay with Naomi? Okay, so we're reading, sorry, I'm reading this.
It's right there, that's, or here, so you don't have,
Oh,
yeah.
okay. So. I'm gonna read something from our little study. Ruth's words to Naomi are among the best known in the Bible. Stop trying to get rid of me, she all but blurts out. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. This really is a startling statement because it signals Ruth's willingness to change not only her citizenship, but her religion. To this day, women converts to Judaism are given the name Ruth in recognition of their courage and conviction. Ruth's words bear out that she knows the risk. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried. Then she proves that Naomi isn't the only one who can end an argument with a dramatic flourish. When Ruth says in verse 17, may the Lord do thus and so to me and more as well, if even death parts me from you. She is taking an oath, and a dangerous one at that. Chances are the words thus and so are the author's code for something much worse. Some words at that time in history were thought to be too risky to print because some unsuspecting reader might accidentally call down a curse on him or herself. In the ancient world, words had power, and by pronouncing this oath, Ruth puts Naomi in a nasty position. If she sends Ruth home now, she risks calling down the consequences of Ruth's broken oath. In short, Ruth is gambling on her mother-in-law's love for her. So what is Naomi's response?
Yeah, all right.
Yeah. Might as well. Yeah, is she super enthusiastic about it? Thanks so much. Not really.
Kind of resigned herself to it.
Yeah. She said no more to her. So then part of her response is she changes her name. Why does she do this? Sorry.
And her situation does get more bitter. Her daughter. Isn't that the name of a spring in the Bible? Mara. Some springs are called Mara.
Well, and they might not be good to drink from. Yeah. So, yeah, so she changed. I think you're right, Wayne, that like her situation just became more bitter because everybody's like, oh, can this be Naomi? And she's like, nope. My son's died, my husband died, and now I have this Moabite daughter-in-law that I love, but you all hate. And she's angry with God. She says, for the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. The Lord has dealt harshly with me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me. She's mad. So, yeah, she's bitter. Do you want to do chesed or should I? Okay.
But cheese.
No.
Chesed.
Chesed.
We looked it up on the pronunciation thing. So the concept of chesed, so the Bible has a special word for the kind of determined love that Ruth demonstrates in this chapter. In Hebrew, it's chesed, sometimes translated as steadfast love or loving kindness or even loyalty. However, it's translated, it means the kind of love that goes above and beyond the call of duty. It is love that puts the welfare of another person ahead of one's own, love that keeps on loving even when there is nothing in it for me. Usually, chesed is used to describe God's love for us and is especially associated with divine covenant faithfulness. In the Book of Ruth, however, we're reminded that this kind of love is possible for humans as well. There is a sense in which the story of Ruth is a call to love in this kind of unselfish way. The story also may be a call for us to consider that God's love pursues us, even if we are, for whatever reason, trying to resist it. Which is kind of an interesting concept. And I think they said there were some references to the Psalms as kind of where this term is used in other places, talking about the covenant between God and his people. So any thoughts about, I mean, that's kind of a big deal to have this word that's been associated only between the divine and his people, and all of a sudden we're deciding to use it in the context of people interacting with other people.
Where is that? Like,
Yeah. Let's see where it is.
yeah, where would that be?
Are you gonna make me do this? I forgot to write it down.
Okay, so hang on.
Psalm 103, verse 8.
Yeah, but where is it?
In Ruth.
Oh, sorry. It's the
It's not, I don't know that the word actually appears in Ruth. I think it's the concept that appears in Ruth.
In what way?
Well,
Where did they get that?
Yeah.
Also, the whole sonnet she's saying is.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
Ruth
it's,
1:8.
yeah.
1:8.
Yeah,
Mhm.
So it is in there.
if you want to write these down, 1:8, 2:20, and 3:10. So what is 1:8?
Oh, may the Lord deal
Kindly with you.
Yeah,
Mhm. And so in my Bible, the note says to deal kindly. The word used in Hebrew is to do chesed.
yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So this is where the concept comes from. This is the first time that it's used between two people. What were the other verses, Matt?
2:20,
Yeah, okay,
3:10.
yeah. Okay, so those will be in future chapters, but yeah, okay, so 3.
2:20 is when Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "Blessed be he by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead." Naomi also said to her, "The man is a relative of ours and is significant." Which is not bad.
And then 3:10 is, he said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. This last instance of your loyalty is better than the first." So.
Are we saying that Boaz is showing Hesed?
Mhm,
Just showing it to Boaz.
yeah. Ruth was showing it to, he does definitely as well, but yeah.
So what do you think the writer's motivation for including that is? When, again, in all other parts of scripture, it's been just a relationship between God and people.
Well, are you saying that God shows us kindness? And that is a divine gift when we don't deserve kindness. So if we show kindness to somebody who doesn't deserve it, maybe we're using the kindness that God, only before God has exhibited. Because usually we're kind to people that are kind to us. And so if we're kind to somebody that is not shown kindness to us, that's using a godlike trait. That's what it's.
Yes, and I think that's the point that they are making, but the question is, why are they doing it when in all other scripture, it's never been used this way? You know what I mean? I mean, it's all, previously, it's always been a divine and people relationship, but the writer in this specific incident chose to use it to talk about the interaction between the two women. Would it have something to do with why the book was written, is my thought. Does it bring more credence to Ruth as a person, to have her display a characteristic that is normally associated with God? When you're trying to make somebody who is an outsider be welcomed into a group that might be kind of hostile towards that.
Do we have any idea who wrote it at all?
And can you quickly recount like what you started with as far as the date and timing of the book? just so that's on the recording
Oh,
here.
yeah, okay. So quick little review of that recounting. So timeline wise, the Southern Kingdom falls in 568 or 586 BC to Persia. In 538, Cyrus allows the Jews to return to Jerusalem. Nehemiah arrives in 445 to begin the task of rebuilding the walls, and Ezra is back rebuilding the religious life of the nation. Ezra's focus is on reforming religious practice and promoting racial purity to help maintain the Jewish community's identity, but there are others that are concerned about the call for separatism. So the books of Ruth and Jonah may have been written to remind Israel of God's love for all nations, opposing the policy of exclusion of foreigners carried out by Ezra and Nehemiah at the time.
Can I read a paragraph from I was looking to see if my Bible had anything suggesting who may have written it, but this doesn't have an author, but I thought this was kind of interesting. Different Bibles place the book of Ruth in different locations. Christian Bibles follow the Septuagint in placing Ruth in between Judges and Samuel. Thus, Ruth seems to be a part of an extended historical narrative that leads the reader directly from the era when there, quote, was no king in Israel to the time of David, the exemplary king. The Hebrew Bible locates Ruth among the writings, the division of the canon that includes wisdom literature and Psalms. It is one of the 5 scrolls or Megillah set apart for liturgical use in the major religious festivals of Judaism. In this location, surrounded by post-exilic, poetic, and wisdom texts, the reader of Ruth finds it easier to recognize the parable-like form of the story. The experiences and attitudes of the major characters in Ruth mirror those of the Judeans who returned from exile and attempted to rebuild their lives among the ruins of Jerusalem in the 6th and 5th centuries BCE. By tracing David's ancestry back to a Moabite woman, the narrator casts serious doubt on the wisdom of Ezra and Nehemiah's attempt to cast all foreign wives out of the restoration community of Israel. So, sorry, it doesn't answer author, but I thought it was interesting historically.
So would this have already been a story that was known, like, or maybe sort of like a folk tale almost, and they maybe just sort of took basically the politics of Ezra and Nehemiah and then used this as a way to sort of take the folk story and use it to push back against those things that they were doing?
I think that's what some people are speculating.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
while you were explaining that, I
Yeah,
was
sorry.
glancing at Judges, that last little bit right before Ruth started.
Yeah.
About these men kidnapping women to become their brides, and go do this, go kidnap these girls, and then you'll have some wives. So,
Yeah,
and then it's followed directly by Ruth.
yeah,
Oh, right.
that's really interesting. That is super great to, yeah.
And then also in Nehemiah, part of what Ezra was putting forward was if you were married to someone who was foreign, that you were supposed to like divorce your wife and send her away. Like when they're talking about this separatist idea, it wasn't just like, don't allow new people in. It was like, get rid of anyone who's not of pure Israeli or not Israeli, but Jewish heritage.
Yeah.
Nehemiah's form of trying to get the nation or get the children of Israel as a group and get them focused on God would be really by the book, when that our relationship with God is all about obedience to God. So it's kind of a whereas Ruth, I think in contrast, kind of represents sort of incarnational approach where our lives can affect other lives with God working through us. It's just not God and me. I'm doing the right thing for God that creates the relationship. It's also the relationship we have. God works through us with other people somehow.
And what a perfect segue, Rain, because our last question is, where do the characters see God at work? And this is a question we're going to bring up each chapter, because that thought carries through the book. And so in chapter 1, where is God at work here? Or where do the characters think God is at work from their perspective?
Elsewhere?
Where, or working against them.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Naomi definitely seems to think that God is up there.
But that was an idea carried in the Old Testament a lot,
Mhm.
because God did both good and bad.
Right.
Um. I don't think it's unique to Naomi here at all.
Well, some of the language that she's using to describe herself, I mean, there are flavors of Job mixed in with this, for sure. I mean, and the tone at the beginning of the book, I mean, again, we don't actually know, we may not actually know the real names of the sons. But I mean, we're just referring to the sickly son, the frail wasting son, the daughter-in-law who left me. These are the terms that we're using, and then the one who stuck by me. I mean, that's basically the translations for these names, right? I mean, so the tone starts out, we're not in a triumphant place. This is a place of brokenness.
And of course, the mystery is that the names they were given at birth?
Yeah.
Yeah, like, oh, look at you, a healthy baby boy, you're going to waste away.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
No, like even if you gave birth to this kid and you looked sick, like would you like really want to do that?
That's like you have a dog that, I guess, we have a dog that occasionally pees in the house, and we sometimes call him pee face. Like, whatever, like, I mean, that's using a nickname like that. So like, it sounds like I'm making fun of these characters.
Well, she changed her name, so it seems, let's hope, like, they changed their names in the last, and they just sat with these names all their lives. You know, so.
Well, it may have
No,
been,
it's okay to change your name halfway through your life.
well, that or the sons may have become known by the adjectives that describe them.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, they may have been, you know. Bob and Roy, I mean, who knows, you know?
Well, it may have been a nickname.
Right, or, you know,
Just
oh,
a
he's,
description.
yeah, he's the frail one, he's always been sickly, and he's, oh, now he's wasting away, and this is that, you know, whatever, I don't know.
Well,
But maybe these were kids with special needs.
You never know.
Yeah.
I mean, they could have been ill for much of their lives. But again, would you
But they
really
attracted
name
good
them that?
women, apparently, strong
Yeah.
women. You know.
Yeah,
Well, it's interesting because Ruth says, call me Mara, but you don't see that name.
Name.
Or Naomi, rather,
Not
Naomi.
catch on, yeah.
But you never see that again in the,
Mhm.
by the way, with an H is the one you're talking about, with the bitter water. Oh,
Oh.
yeah. Like an Exodus.
We went to that faster than I thought we were
I
going.
know.
Any other thoughts or comments? This is like the first step of their journey. There's a lot of story left, but
But you have to wait till next.
you have to wait till
I
next
know,
week.
like a cliffhanger, dun, dun, dun.
I like how you turn it like a really subversive story in a good way, you know, push back against the nationalism.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
And I also like the intrigue, I've heard Tim Mackey talk about this, like when, remember the story of Balaam when they had him come and curse Israel, and the whole time the Israelites are struggling and he's supposed to curse them, he's blessing them. And so Mackey points out like this juxtaposition of the way that we see what's going on in our life. And the whole time God is intending to bless us.
Mhm.
So the whole time that it's Naomi, right, who's feeling cursed and broken and God has forsaken her. He's actually sewing her into the line of King David and ultimately Jesus,
Mhm.
and you know, pulling Ruth in as well. So I like those aspects of them.
You know, when I read it before, I've been struck by how much they were making of this foreigner, so they made that a little more clear to me.
Yeah, Moab was not a place, it's interesting that they chose to go there in the first place. I mean, did they only choose that because they weren't part of the famine? It's interesting to me that they would choose a place that was so reviled. And had been for a long time.
Well, and that whole idea kind of recalls other stories in the Old Testament of famine, and the people traveling and finding, food in a foreign land like the Egypt, yeah. And Abraham goes to Egypt too, right? Is there?
Yeah. I don't think Egypt was reviled as much as Moab was, though.
Moab's closer though.
It is.
Yeah.
It is, but I'm just saying, as far as going to find food there in Egypt.
Hmm.
It's an echo of that, but it's not going to such a hated place. I don't know. Well, do we have anything else, or should we just?
Well, because of the foreigner issue here,
Yeah.
and because Moab was hated so much. There are so many contemporary issues that we could look at today. I mean, we look at all of those who are coming to the southern borders. And in many ways, how much they are hated by others. Yeah, there's just a lot of takeaways here in the story. And I'm sure you will go, but it's interesting also who Ruth becomes. That's in the future, I think.
But I think that one thing that stuck out to me this time, kind of going through it, is I always kind of viewed her as a more passive actor early on until the end, or one that was almost just kind of brought along by everybody else telling her where to go. But she showed a lot of agency in this. I mean, it was not just I'm a pawn and I got blessed and put in the right place at the right time. Like, she actually showed some real, gumption to.
She found her voice.
Yeah.
She definitely did.
And we might think of like, who are the Ruths in our society now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you, have you ever been anywhere where you have really been the outsider and been subject to racism?
I was the only white teacher in a building of all Black kids and all Black teachers. And the only person, the kids were wonderful. There were a couple teachers that indicated to me that would I possibly know how to teach Black kids. But I also had made some very close Black friends as well while I was teaching in that school. It was interesting, and I never felt that the political situation had any impact on what I was teaching or what I was doing.
The others that.
We share that experience. Actually, my parents were social workers when I was a little kid, and so I was maybe there were a dozen Black kids in the whole Indianapolis public schools that I went to for several years. Black faces. It's an interesting experience. See it from the other side.
Yeah, we were talking about something about Japan the other day. I don't need to go into it, but and I made the comments, well, yeah, Japanese are racist. And I'm traveling to Japan, obviously kind of standing out or whatever. And I mean, people are kind in some levels and things, hospitable, but yeah, they're very much against the outsiders and Korean, maybe more so with Korean or Chinese and stuff, but Yeah, so it's a mindset, I think, that unless you've experienced it on some level, it's hard to really grasp what it must have been like, I think, for Ruth to make that decision. Or, I mean, on some level, I suppose, you know, Naomi and her family to go to Moab as well, but even more so for Ruth as a widow to go back with her mother-in-law.
Yeah, I don't know if she physically looked different, but I was in Egypt 6 months after 9/11 had happened. And I mean, walking down the street, being a white person among all the Egyptians, they would like turn and like, what, who's that, what? You know, because 9/11 had just happened, and so it was like really kind of weird, you couldn't be anonymous. If you're walking down the street, people would always turn and look at you like, who is that, why are they here? You know, we were always treated nicely because the people that we were specifically there to meet treated us nicely. But just going down the street or something like that, we were stared at and, you know, it was uncomfortable, I guess. So I don't know if she looked different just by, but it was small community, so everyone knew who she was, but you know, it was just, it is weird to go to a place where people stop and turn and look at you because you look different than everybody else. You know?
And they definitely knew. I mean, this is cliffhanger for next week, but one of when they arrive, like the people know who they are. I mean, there's no like hiding it. They know exactly who Naomi is and they know exactly who Ruth is. So. Well, the study that we're working off of has they're really just lovely closing prayers. And because we always sit around and wait for someone to be willing to pray, I thought, you know what, we should just do this as a group because we're really good at reading together and church people. And like I said, I just thought that I couldn't have come up with something better. So I thought, let's just go ahead and use what they have provided. So if you join me. Faithful God, when we are tempted to feel like you have abandoned us, when we are bitter in spirit and hard of heart, soften our spirits with your relentless love, and fold us with your grace, forgive us with your love, love us with love that will not let us go. Help us to live in hope and to be beacons of that same hope to all we meet. In Jesus' name we pray. So next week, the next chapter.
Yeah.
Can we read ahead?
You can if you want, but no spoilers.
Because, yeah, don't tell anybody else your thoughts and your theories.
No, my thoughts.